Hi there and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I will be talking about 10 talking points that the fossil fuel lobbyists use to convince our politicians to make new fossil fuel projects. Specifically for the LNG part of it here in Canada where I live, but this probably works for wherever you live, especially if your country is beholden to the necro-capitalist war machine, which is basically all of us. I'm constantly torn between thinking that politicians don't know any better, but then it's their job to know better. Plus, the fossil fuel industry has been lobbying politicians for decades, if not centuries. They're pretty entrenched with both money and power, so we kind of have to be really strategic if we want to convince our leadership to break free from that dead end but extremely profitable path. So the first talking point I see is that LNG Canada is the largest private sector investment in Canadian history. It's about jobs and prosperity, Canadian sovereignty. Well, sure, it's short-term jobs, but it's long-term climate costs. Most fossil fuel construction jobs are temporary. The majority of profits flow to multinational corporations, not local communities. Meanwhile, these projects lock in fossil fuel use for decades and undermine climate commitments. And then there's the opportunity cost because every dollar invested in fossil fuels is a dollar that is not invested in anything else. Renewable energy, efficiency retrofits, grid infrastructure, all of which create more jobs per dollar and are future-proof. Talking point number 2, LNG promotes Indigenous partnerships. While some First Nations have partnered with LNG projects, many First Nation leaders oppose them due to environmental risks, impacts on rights and title, and threat to salmon and traditional territories. True economic reconciliation means investing in Indigenous-led clean energy projects, not locking communities into fossil fuel infrastructure that is destined to become stranded assets as the world transitions quickly into clean energy. Talking point number 3, LNG helps Canada access Asian markets and reduce dependence on the US. As we already spoke about, global LNG demand is volatile and declining. The IEA and other major analysts project a peak in fossil gas demand by 2030. Asian countries like Japan and South Korea are heavily investing in renewables and hydrogen, not long-term LNG deals. LNG markets are risky and oversupplied, and this increases the chances that Canadian projects will become stranded assets. Plus, the people and corporations invested in building these pipelines, they are directly related to Trump and his government. Approving these projects is literally handing our energy sovereignty to the people that want Canada to become the 51st state, and who are already moving like that's a certainty because that's kind of what we're giving to them. Talking point number 4. Canadian LNG is responsibly produced. It's lower carbon than other sources. LNG is still a fossil fuel, and beyond that, it's methane. Methane is over 80 times more potent than CO2 over 20 years. Even low-carbon LNG produces significant emissions from fracking, methane leakage, liquefaction, transportation, and combustion. There is no clean version of LNG. Like, lower carbon than Qatar is not a climate solution, it's just adding to the problem. Talking point number 5. We are helping other countries reduce emissions by replacing coal with LNG. The coal to gas switch is a myth, okay? Studies show that LNG displaces renewables, not just coal, especially in markets that are already transitioning. LNG projects delay clean energy. Also, because it is methane, life cycle emissions of LNG can be as bad or worse than coal. The idea that LNG is clean is outdated and completely misleading. Talking point number 6. It's better for Japan and Korea to buy LNG from Canada than from Qatar or the US. This is a false choice, obviously. We don't reduce global emissions by fighting over who gets to sell fossil fuels. We all share an atmosphere. The real goal is to accelerate clean energy adoption worldwide, not just offer a slightly cleaner version of the same problem. Also, longer shipping distances, they don't really negate LNG climate damage. They're a minor part of total emissions compared to upstream extraction and combustion. Talking point 7. LNG supports high-quality labor standards and environmental protections. These standards should apply to any project, including renewables. They don't justify fossil fuel expansions. Besides, worker transition plans and green job programs, they offer more long-term stability than the boom and bust from the fossil fuel industry, which is increasingly at risk from automation and the global transition. Talking point number 8. LNG Canada's emissions are 60% lower than the global average. That's a PR stat with literally no climate credibility. Even 60% lower still means millions of tons of CO2 and methane. What matters is absolute emission reductions. And LNG Canada will still produce emissions that are incompatible with BC's own climate targets. Talking point number 9. Phasing out fossil fuels, it takes time. LNG is a necessary bridge. LNG is not a bridge, it is a sinkhole. It's a speed ramp to more climate chaos. The whole world needs to cut emissions by nearly a third this decade. Building new LNG infrastructure in 2025 is reckless and counterproductive, and in my personal opinion, insane. Clean energy is now cheaper, faster to deploy, and more job rich than fossil gas, and it doesn't threaten air or water or land or our health. And the last talking point, if we didn't do this, Canada would miss out, and other people would build it anyway. Following people off a cliff is not climate leadership. If someone was hurling themselves off of a cliff, would you follow them? No, right? BC has this amazing potential to lead in renewable energy, conservation, indigenous led solutions. Not LNG exports. Let's move on. A race to the bottom logic justifies continuous harm for profit. Instead, we should invest in resilient, future proof industries. I hope all these make sense, and I know that they do because this is the way. This is the only way at this point. Fossil fuels made a lot of sense back then, but we should have used all of that energy and that amazing potential that we had over all of these decades and centuries, to be honest, 200 years of industrial revolution. We should have evolved it. But we didn't because it's an incredibly profitable industry and evolution means changing the way of things, and that's kind of a hard thing to contend with. Still, it has become necessary and it leads us to such a better future than the one we're currently on, which actually looks quite ugly. So I really hope that all of these were useful in preparing you to speak to your governance and your leadership. As you can see, there are multiple holes in the argument for building more archaic, dirty, planet-destroying infrastructure. And once you understand the basis of these holes and how renewable energy can plug them, with a mountain of benefits to spare, you have the power to sway the course of the world into a brighter, cleaner future. So good luck on the mission, and I'll see you on the next video.